Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Interesting topic for you today. Let's do it. What's your a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth story do you have? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I met this kid while in junior high. Knew him his first year in high school back in 78, 79. Remember the movie Carrie? He had that for a mother. He was super religious and had to pray multiple times a day, carried a large Bible with his school books, wore old fashioned formal clothes, 1950s style haircut, and horn rimmed glasses. His mother punished him because she saw us talking when he got off the school bus. I guess I didn't pass the friend standard. He was so unsocialized and awkward. He was grateful to speak with anyone, and I didn't make fun of him. I guess it got to be too much. He didn't come back to school for his sophomore year. I later learned that while his mother was sleeping, he doused her with the gasoline and set her and the bed on fire. She lived, and they just disappeared. I never heard of him again. There was that nuclear revenge post about a guy ostracized by the entire town, I think cause he was born out of wedlock, and after getting out of there, became an inspector of some kind. Eventually, he was given a list of factories that needed reviewing, and one needed to close. The factory in his hometown was on this list. He goes there, inspects, they act all buddy-buddy thinking they're safe from closure. Boy, were they wrong. Every infraction, breach of safety, incorrect anything went into his report. The whole town basically was built around that factory. Then, when it shut down, it was desolate and dead within a few years. A guy I went to high school with burned the bridge with his entire family. We weren't best friends, more of a friend type of situation. So, my info is a lot of hearsay. But I do know some things for certain. He was the middle child, with an older sister and a younger brother. His parents had owned a diner, and it had been in his family for a few generations. It was an unspoken rule that the kids of each generation would help out when they were little and eventually take it over to keep it in the family. The problem was, none of them wanted anything to do with it. It was the easiest way to set him off. Even mentioning it would have him go from 0 to 100 real quick. This didn't stop either of his parents, though. They would joke about how the kids didn't need to worry about college or moving away. All of that would be taken care of when they would run the diner. The sister, being the oldest, was the first really pressured into it, but he and his brother told her to get out and don't look back, and don't let them guilt trip you. So she did, and goes to college on a sports scholarship and then moves a few states away. She occasionally visits, but more or less left the town in her rearview mirror. Then it was his turn, but unfortunately he didn't have the money to get away, so his parents tell him to go to community college and work at the diner to save money. This is where the issues started. The younger brother doesn't go to college and decides to go couch surfing and backpacking across the country for a few years, occasionally coming back to work for a few weeks when he needed the money, only to take off again. So my friend gets left running the place, despite swearing he never would. I'd see him around sometimes at bars, and he was a bitter shell of his former self, with a bad drinking problem and a series of failed relationships. His parents didn't seem to care that their son was a depressed alcoholic, so long as their family legacy stayed the same. He confided in me how they were pushing him to get married and give them grandkids, to settle down and let go of this silly dream of starting over when he has the diner, which, given how shit-faced he was in nearly every interaction I had with him, it's impressive he was able to run it. His sister and brother couldn't be bothered to come down and help, and in fact, they started to agree with the parents that he should just cut his losses and make this life work for him. One day, he drops off the face of the earth. Nobody sees or hears from him for 3 weeks. His parents say he went on vacation, and they also hadn't heard from him. Then suddenly he's back in town, seemingly in much better spirits, looking healthier than we had seen him in years. About 2 months later, the diner is torn down and replaced with some other business. As it turns out, his girlfriend at the time gave him an ultimatum: quit the drinking and go to therapy or we're done. So he does, and the therapist points out the obvious things linking his depression and says he should take a vacation and figure out what else he wants to do with his life. He went to Vegas, partied for 2 weeks, and admittedly thought about killing himself. After getting it out of his system, he devises a plan to sell the diner and pocket the money for himself. Everything was in his name as the owner anyway, so it was pretty easy. He took the best offer he could and used that money to leave town. The brother and sister didn't get a dime, and the parents were already retired. He moved to the other side of the country with his now wife, and we follow each other on social media, but he seems much happier. Apparently, he hasn't spoken a word to his family in years, nor they to him, and does not intend to start. Well, not too much you can say about this one. I mean, it was in his name, so technically it was his business to do with what he chose. And if his parents were really the way they were explained through this story, then, I mean, no fault there. My bio parents lost custody of me due to addictions and neglect. I was adopted as a teenager by a woman who ended up being emotionally abusive, and I was supposed to be thankful because she pulled me out of the gutter and gave me opportunities in her mind. She's an extravagant spender and has blown through 2 large inheritances and a divorce settlement, years of alimony, and refused to get a job, even though she holds multiple master's degrees in a desirable field, used the school loans to continue funding her lifestyle instead of working. She never saved for retirement despite having the means and opportunity to do so. Growing up, she told me I would grow up to be a drug-addicted dropout. I suspect that her bio children were her retirement plan because she told them to marry rich and pushed them into what she thought would be a lucrative degree. It was a classic scapegoat golden children scenario. She never fathomed that of all her kids, it would be me that broke 6 figures having landed a great career. Too bad for her that I cut her off 7 years ago and never looked back. She's now in her 60s, having to start over financially. Her children don't make enough to support her, and I won't contribute. Growing up, our neighbors had a couple boys, 10 and 14, plus or minus at the time of this story. The younger son had a good friend that would stay at their house very frequently. He was always pretty quiet and kept to himself, except when he was with his friend, the 10-year-old, which was when he could be himself. One day we find out that he was permanently moving in with my neighbors due to an unsafe situation at home. Apparently, this poor kid got to watch his mother be murdered by her boyfriend, all because drugs, right in front of him, the 10-year-old. Luckily, my neighbors stepped up and offered to take him in, which was actually great for everyone. He really started to blossom and became pretty stable, with a caveat. He just didn't take any shit from anyone, which leads to our terrific act of rebellion. Like everyone else in our neighborhood, we rode the bus home. This kid is riding home from elementary school when the bus driver started going off on the kids for real or imagined indiscretions. Well, this kid takes offense to this and speaks up on behalf of the rest of the kids. Bus driver, now royally pissed, angry for our non-US crowd, tells his kid, "One more word and I'm kicking you off the bus." Well, you're correct in your assumption of what transpired next. Kid gets kicked off the bus, which royally pisses him off, so cue MC. Kid walks off the bus and immediately walks in front of the bus. We were about a mile from his normal stop at our street, and this was a 2-lane road with sporadic oncoming traffic. No way the driver could get away with trying to pass, so he drove at a walking pace until the kid got to our street. Parents were wondering where their children were, as everyone was now 30+ minutes late, and were overall very amused when they discovered the cause. Still, about the most proud of a 10-year-old I've ever been, and I have 2 of my own. Anyway, I gotta look that guy up. Hope he's well. Someone I used to have in a support group I once helped run for sexually victimized and abused young men shared with us what happened to him. I'm not going into the finer details of it, but the broad stroke is he was being victimized by a TA. He went to other teachers, school admins, and even police. No one believed him, and he even got punished for making it up to get a staff member in trouble. It destroyed his personality. He became bitter, resentful, spiteful, and generally hateful of other people. He was improving his demeanor in the group, but from what he tells us, he just wanted to watch the world die at that time. A couple years later, that same TA tripped down the stairwell in one of the side hallways of the school, and he happened to be nearby. He saw she was badly injured and likely had broken bones and was bleeding from her head. Instead of helping her, he literally stepped over her and pretended she wasn't there. Security footage showed he wasn't the one to push her, but when asked why he didn't say anything or get help, he simply said that the last time he tried to tell people about something involving her, no one helped, so why would they this time? One of my friends in high school was a major overachiever, stayed at school or work as much as possible, to the point where he may have spent an hour or less at home a day. He would always deflect questions about his home life, but confided to me that it was bad. Calling him the black sheep of the family would be a major understatement. His family had some money, not millionaire or billionaire, but better off than most, and they told him from elementary school he would always be useless and never amount to anything. He's making bank after getting through college and finding a bomb job at a big pharmaceutical company. Meanwhile, his father's company, that has been in the family for a few generations, got picked apart by the government. Someone tipped them off that he was lying on taxes, hiring immigrants for next to nothing, hiding OSHA violations, and much more. As the dust was settling and the damage was really being seen, my buddy drove to his former family home and dropped off a file, the same file he gave an attorney that gave it to the government and only said, "Who won't amount to anything." Okay, I know some of you may disagree with my overall point. Can someone do this as an act of vengeance? I suppose if, the abuse was true. That being said, you're not just affecting, the parents that wronged you, but if that factory did employ people, then you could be hurting other families. So it's like collateral damage when someone drops a drone bomb somewhere. Yeah, you might get your target, but how many innocent people got maimed or killed? Quite a literal version. Had a kid come to my ninth grade classroom with 4 felony arson counts. We knew before he got there that he had 4 felonies, just not in what and his other 3 teachers, and the principal called an emergency meeting where they didn't want him in their rooms at all. Principal wanted us to either give up our planning or teach him after regular hours. I adamantly told them to get effed, that I wouldn't give my planning up for God himself, and least restrictive environment said he was in the classroom. TBF, I already had a room full of gang members, so what was another kid with felonies? Turns out, this kid had never met his dad, and his mom worked 3 to 4 jobs, only got to see her like maybe once a week. He was breaking into homes for food and then burning them down for attention. It was really just a cry for help. I liked the kid, and he had me first period. Would come in high as an effing kite and is giving him a cherry coke and bagels to eat. Never skipped my class. Never misbehaved after the first week with me. Everyone hated on him and he lashed out accordingly. Started reading a porn mag and drinking a 5th of vodka in math class, etc. I ended up getting expelled despite my intervention. A few months later, he was arrested and charged as an adult after a string of breaking and entering with arson and robbery. He got some girlfriend who convinced him to rob places to steal her shit, which, of course, he did, because no one else was acting like they loved him, and of course, he went back to setting fires. Torched at least half a dozen homes. This kid I went to elementary school was a foster youth. He was extremely kind to everyone, despite the fact that his life was unbelievably hard. People delude themselves about the system and think it's just a system that fixes kids' lives. Talk to former foster youth and you'll find that it's almost never a good thing in a kid's life. Anyway, the teachers at my waspy-ass school genuinely bullied this kid, like they treated him completely unfairly, and it was fully classism for reference. We both had behavior issues, and while that way I was treated was not okay at all, I was not demonized the way this kid was. I'd hit someone, I would get in no trouble. He would speak out of turn and get suspended for 2 to 3 weeks. It was rancid how they treated this boy, who was just there to learn. Anyway, his teacher suddenly went on leave. She was approved to be a foster mom, and she got chosen to foster a baby. She was over the moon because she couldn't make a baby on her own, and she figured she'd just adopt the baby through foster care. If anyone is unaware of this, this is something that unethical foster parents frequently do. They foster with the hopes of reunification never being able to happen, so they can adopt for free and without a wait list. It's gross. If you look at the stats, reunification comes out on top for best outcome for the whole family. Praying for a family to break up so you can start one is disgusting. Long story short, her plan was to adopt the baby, but the baby's actual mother was able to get her kid back thankfully. The teacher was devastated and took a few months off. One of the teachers of our grade talked to us all and explained that she didn't get to keep the kid, so she was very upset, and so we shouldn't bring it up when she comes back. My friend was happy she was gone, because she was his biggest bully. This fact makes me irate, because don't be an effing foster parent if you're not trauma-informed enough to not bully a foster kid for showing normal signs of trauma. Unfortunately, though, she did come back right before we graduated, so the first thing he said to her was, "Hey teacher, how's the kids?" And I've always respected him for it. He deserved the opportunity to throw her exploitation of a system that he never should have had to be subjected to in her face. Infertility does not give you a free license to prey on the downfall of a family. For 53 years, my father gaslit me and always made me feel like one day he would be a real father. Well, he's in his 80s and has Parkinson's and is married to a terrible woman, and I no longer help him or my stepmother in their old age because they're such terrible people. Now, they have to find other people to give them rides, to lift things, to listen to doctors, etc. Oh, I also informed my stepmother that the day my father dies, and while she's picking out a casket, I will march into the IRS to report her for committing tax fraud with my father. There's no statute of limitations, and I want her to sweat every time she hears him cough, sneeze, or moan. F them. I was lied to by HR, and it led to me not getting a promotion. I basically put them in a position where I couldn't be replaced and messed with the Excel codes I made for them that saved managers 6 hours a day. I didn't correct what I knew would get us high fees, since it wasn't technically my job. Then I quit. $700K in fines, nobody trained to do scheduling, department without anyone to run it, and additional work for the managers was the damage. I started getting calls to help them fix it. I'm sure you can imagine how well that went for them. If they were foolish enough not to learn the systems and relied solely on one person, then they reap what they sow and they deserved it, so good for you. My mother was abusive to my sister and I growing up. She ended up anorexic, has been in therapy her whole life, took years and years to fix herself and still isn't there. I ended up with bad generalized anxiety, social anxiety, depression, and self-loathing, and was emotionally and verbally abusive in past relationships. My mom used to make us promise we'd never put her in a home when she got old. Last year, my mental problems came to a head, and I started therapy, medication, and being honest with my parents about my mom's abuse. I gave them an ultimatum of either acknowledging the damage and taking responsibility by apologizing for it so we could move forward, or I'd never speak with them again. My dad apologized immediately. He was less abusive than she was, and held more guilt than she ever did. We're on good terms now. My mother denies everything and has been totally cut off by my sister and I. She will end up in an old folks' home after all. She has no children left, consequences of her own actions. So, I don't know, I didn't burn down a village, but I did burn down that relationship. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers.